Let's please all stand. Coroners Court is now sitting.
Good morning. Yes, Ms Stevens.
May it please the Court, Your Honour. This is the inquiry into the cause and origin of the Washpool State Forest Kumbaja bushfire. I will refer to this as the Washpool 2 fire inquiry. The Washpool State Forest is a native forest located about 70 kilometres northwest of Grafton. It is very steep in certain areas and has a mix of wet and dry forest with rainforest gullies facing from south to east. The forest is approximately 2,700 hectares in size and is located on the eastern edge of the large Washpool National Park and Wilderness area. The Washpool 2 fire was one of the larger fires in northern New South Wales and burned in the Clarence Valley local government area, encompassed within the lands of the Bundjalung, Gumbaynggirr and Narabul people. The Washpool fire was detected on the 30th of October 2019 and burned for almost 10 weeks. The fire damaged a total area of approximately 133,000 hectares, most of which was private land. The fire impacted about 42,000 hectares of national park of significant heritage value and 19,000 hectares of state forest. The fire damaged or destroyed about 15 residential structures. I will pause and show Your Honour now a map obtained from Google of the general area. Just scroll in a little, please. Your Honour will see the map with terrain, and the flag is the assumed point of origin of the Washpool 2 fire, and Your Honour will see the various townships around that flag and the very dense bushland in the centre of the photograph. The Court will hear evidence today regarding the complexities associated with identifying the cause of the Washpool 2 fire. To understand the cause, it is necessary to look back to the months leading up to the ignition. In this case, the Court will hear that there were 3 smaller fires that burned within the same area and prior to the Washpool 2 fire. This inquiry will consider each of those fires and highlight the difficulties in identifying the connections, if any, between them. Today, the Court will hear oral evidence from the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Acting Sergeant Travis Ware, the Rural Fire Service Fire Investigator Mark Fuliga, and finally, from expert witness Richard Woods. It is likely that the evidence from these investigators and the expert will be that the cause, ultimately, of the Washpool 2 fire is undetermined. The opinions expressed by these witnesses will be explored in the oral evidence. Your Honour, it's necessary to give you a summation of each of the 4 fires in order to consider how the Washpool 2 fire started. Neither the subject fire, Washpool 2, nor these smaller fires were reported to police at the time. These fires were only identified by investigating police during a bushfire season review conducted many months after the event. I'll start with the first fire, known as Second Creek Washpool State Forest Fire. This first fire was located in the Washpool State Forest by a member of Air Attack from the National Parks and Wildlife Service at around 3 p.m. on the 17th of August 2019. This fire burned for over 2 weeks and as I just set out, is known as Second Creek Fire. It burnt 703 hectares, consisting mainly of state forest, as well as some 69 hectares of private land and 17 hectares of national park. It was declared out on 30 August. Your Honour will see now a map showing the total area in the middle of the page. We might scroll in to view it. This is the total area burned by this first fire, confusingly called the Second Creek Fire. Your Honour will also see if we scroll back out, the Long Gully Road fire depicted at the top of the map, just at the very top. Thank you. At this time, the RFS did not consider this bushfire to meet the criteria for the cause and origin investigation. Accordingly, no investigation was conducted. On 26 August 2020, that is 1 year later, as part of the later investigations, the RFS reviewed historical satellite imagery of that area in order to capture real-time Earth observation. This investigation produced relevant imagery in the form of what appears to be a smoking tree near the suspected point of origin on 13 August 2019. Your Honour will see on that image from historical satellite data, what appears to be a smoking tree. This suspected area of origin of the Second Creek Fire was mapped by the RFS as originating to the west of Red Bank Road in Washpool State Forest and bordering on private property. On 25 September 2020, after the police had commenced their investigations, Senior Constable Daniel Drew of the New South Wales Police Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command, or FETS, and the RFS fire investigator Mark Fuliga attended this scene. Mr. Fuliga reported observing macro indicators of fire around this scene, including the angle of char and some foliage freeze, which suggested that the fire moved in an easterly and northerly direction. There were also indicators of backburning along and off the roads to the area. It appeared that there had been fire on the northern side of an unnamed road in the area, and it had travelled in a northerly and easterly direction. He was unable to locate any hard containment lines on the northern and eastern perimeters of this fire. Mr. Fuliga did not find any evidence of lightning strikes. Due to the limited information available at the scene, he was unable to determine the cause or origin of this Second Creek Fire. He concluded it was undetermined. He deemed the origin to be the location of the burning tree, where private land bordered on the Washpool State Forest. Senior Constable Drew made similar observations to Mr. Fuliga, and his conclusion is the same, that is, undetermined. Mr. Woods reviewed the evidence of this fire investigation for the purposes of this inquiry. He did not attend the scene for a number of reasons, namely the significant passage of time since the fire. He has also formed the view that the cause of the Second Creek Fire is undetermined. He states that if the smoking tree is considered the origin of the Second Creek Fire, it could have been burning for several days or possibly weeks before it was detected. Mr. Woods now also has the benefit of lightning strike data obtained within a 50-kilometre radius of the smoking tree, which shows no lightning strikes in the area. As a result, he eliminated lightning as a cause of this fire. I turn now to the second fire, otherwise known as the Red Bank Road Fire. On 8 September 2019, just over 2 weeks after the Second Creek Fire had been declared out, Another fire ignition was detected in the vicinity of Red Bank Road. This fire, named the Red Bank Road Kumbaja Fire, originated 400 metres north of the smoking tree mentioned earlier. It was adjacent to the fire edge of the earlier Second Creek fire at the time it was declared out. This second fire, the Red Bank Road fire, burnt for about 10 days before it was declared out on 18 September. In that time, it destroyed 301 hectares of private land, 48 hectares of state forest, and 1.5 hectares of other land. I'll pause and show the court a map of this fire, and we'll scroll in and Your Honour will see this composition. To the right, the hatched area is the second fire that we're talking about now, and to the left, that other hatched area is the first fire, the Second Creek fire that I just concluded my summary of the evidence of. Thank you. The RFS did not consider this bushfire as one that met its criteria for cause and origin investigation. As a result, again, it was not until around a year later, on 25 September 2020, that an examination of the scene of this fire, Red Bank Road fire, was conducted again by Senior Constable Drew and Mr. Fuliga. They observed macro indicators of angle of char on the trees. They formed the view that this fire originated on the western side of the Red Bank Road between a dry creek bed used to contain the earlier fire and Red Bank Road. They concluded that the fire had travelled across Red Bank Road in an easterly direction. Again, they did not locate any hard containment lines. Senior Constable Drew formed the view that the cause of this fire was also undetermined. In his view, this fire and the earlier Second Creek fire were in fact one continuous fire and not separate. Mr. Fuliga also formed the view that the cause of this second fire was undetermined. Mr. Woods has reviewed this analysis in his report. He agrees that the cause of the Red Bank Road fire is undetermined. He says that the influence of the southwesterly wind on the previously burnt Second Creek fire may have enhanced any remaining fuel to the northeastern containment edge, resulting in embers being carried by the wind or the movement of fire in burning vegetation as it progressed across the containment line. Mr. Woods also eliminates a number of other potential causes, such as campfire, smoking, debris burning, juvenile play and the railway as possible causes of this fire. He could not discount some of the other potential causes, and nor could he eliminate the reignition by the earlier fire as a possible cause. Mr. Woods has considered the lightning to be an unresolved or possible cause. This is because there were 18 recorded lightning strikes on the 29th and 30th of August 2019 within 5 kilometres of the burnt area, but no direct evidence of a lightning struck tree. I turn now to the third fire, known otherwise as Washpool 1. On 9 October 2019, just 3 weeks after the second fire, the Red Bank Road fire, was declared out, there was yet another fire in the Washpool State Forest. This fire was first managed under the same name of the former fire, but was soon after renamed as Washpool or Washpool 1. Your Honour will recall hearing evidence earlier this week regarding the treacherous weather conditions on 8 and 9 October 2019, which caused erratic and anomalous fire behaviour in other parts of the state, particularly in regard to the Busby's Flat Fire and the Long Gully Road Fire, which, as Your Honour has heard, resulted in the deaths of Gwen Hyde and Robert Lindsay. I'll show you on now a map which also contains the area of the Washpool 1 fire relative to those other fires, namely Long Gully Road and Busby's Flat. Firstly, Your Honour will see in the two hatched areas, the first and the second fires that I've already referred to. The symbol of the flame is the origin of Washpool 1, and if we zoom out, Your Honour will see above the presence of the Long Gully fire and the Busby Flats fire as at that time. Thank you. The Washpool 1 fire burned for just over 2 weeks and was declared out on 24 October 2019. It destroyed 274 hectares of land, including mostly state forest and 57 hectares of private land. There was no reported damage to homes in the area. This fire, Washpool 1, is considered to have originated around 1.2 kilometres north of the area of origin of the Red Bank Road fire. Similarly to the previous two fires, 1 year later, or thereabouts, on 14th of August 2020, Senior Constable Drew and Mr Fuliga attended the scene of this fire. During their examination, they observed the most predominant indicators as the angle of char. This allowed the investigators to form the view that this fire travelled in a northerly direction on either side of Red Bank Road. They also located indicators at the heel of the Washpool 1 fire that showed the advancing fire, in their view, from the earlier fires. Senior Constable Drew is of the view that ultimately the cause of Washpool 1 is undetermined. He does hold the view that these three fires are one continuous fire due to the lack of hard or natural containment lines between each and the consistent height and angle of char on the trees throughout the areas nominated as separate fires. Mr Fuliga, the RFS investigator, concludes that Washpool 1 was likely caused by smouldering debris reigniting from under the first or the second fire, or both, but that human intervention could not be discounted. Mr Woods, in his analysis, considers that the cause of this third fire to be undetermined. As to the area of origin proposed by Senior Constable Drew and Mr Fuliga, Mr Woods notes that given the southeasterly wind, in his words, it is plausible that any remnant of smouldering fuel near the northern western boundaries of the Second Creek and Red Bank Road fire possibly resulted in embers being carried by the wind or the movement of fire burning in vegetation progressing north into unburnt fuel, resulting in the ignition of this third fire. Your Honour, I turn now to my summary of the fourth and final fire, Washpool 2, that is the subject of your formal consideration today. Just 6 days after the Washpool 1 fire was declared out, another fire was declared as going in the Washpool State Forest. This became known as Washpool 2. The Washpool fire was first detected on Washpool 2 fire was first detected on 30 October 2019. Information in the brief suggests that the fire was discovered by members of the Clarence Valley Incident Management Team after reviewing line scans or other aerial imagery. Senior Constable Daniel Drew and Mr Fuliga attended the scene of this final fire nearly a year later, on 14 August 2020, the same day they visited Washpool 1. They made several attempts to access the assumed area of origin, but due to the number of fallen trees across the roads in that area and time constraints, they were not able to reach the particular area. Mr Fuliga formed the view that the Washpool State Forest fire was caused by the reignition of Washpool 1. He came to this opinion from an analysis of the available maps and line scans rather than having the benefit of examination due to the reasons set out above. Senior Constable Drew also concluded that the cause of Washpool 2 was undetermined owing to evidence of human activity, including the use of heavy machinery in farming practices. He was not in a position to determine the precise area of origin. However, he determined some approximate points of origin of each fire and was able to identify again the smoking tree, which was detected on the satellite imagery. This is a map that sets out the assumed points of origin of each of the 4 fires, and in yellow, the burning tree that was first identified on 13th, as burning on 13th of August 2019. Mr. Woods has reviewed the opinions of Mr. Fuliga and Senior Constable Drew and is of the opinion that the cause of this Washpool 2 fire is undetermined. He does not consider that there is enough evidence to state that this was in fact one fire as opposed to a number of separate fires. Your Honour, I'll provide you now with some summary information in regard to actually fighting the blaze. On 30th of October 2019, when Washpool 2 ignited, most of the Clarence Valley local government area was the subject of a Section 44 declaration. As Your Honour has heard, there were numerous large fires burning there at the time, including Long Gully Road and the Bees Nest fires. In the first week of the Washpool 2 fire, firefighting operations focused on containment. On 7 and 8 November 2019, weather conditions deteriorated. On 7 November, maximum temperatures soared to 37 degrees with 8% humidity. On 8th of November, the maximum temperatures reached 35 degrees. That day of 8 November brought erratic and intense fire movement in New South Wales. Next week, the court will hear evidence into the inquests of the deaths of Vivian Chaplin, George Knoll and Christopher Sava, whose lives were lost all on this day. On 8th of November, the Washpool 2 fire broke containment lines in multiple locations and burned out of control to the west, east and north. The focus of firefighting operations shifted to property protection until the conditions eased. By 9th of October, the Washpool 2 fire had grown significantly in size. Your Honour will see this represented visually on the following map. If we scroll in, Your Honour will see that all of those areas marked by either dark or light tan are all Washpool 2 fire, and its significant size is clear from that representation. Your Honour will also see the Busby's flat fire to the north, shaded in blue, and the Kangawalla fire to the southeast. Thank you. Over the next 2 weeks, the Washpool 2 fire continued to break containment lines, creating new active fire fronts or spot fires. It crossed Clarence Way and was burning in remote terrain to the west. Firefighting crews prioritised containment, including tactical backburning, but the fire was still threatening properties. Aircraft, heavy plant and further ground crews were deployed to assist. From 20 to 21 November 2019, more favourable weather conditions assisted containment efforts. The RFS expected that the southwest section of the Busby's flat fire and the northeast section of the Washpool 2 fire would merge. The Washpool fire and the Mile Creek fire merged on 25 of November. Your Honour will see this represented in the following map. Your Honour will see Busby's flat at the top of the image in grey and Washpool 2 below in the brown. In early December 2019, Washpool 2 was still active, but more tactical burns were approved as weather conditions also improved. The Washpool fire was ultimately declared out on 7 January 2020 after it had merged with the Mount Spirabo fire. Your Honour will see this final map. I'm sorry, Your Honour, that's my error. That was a reference to the previous map. I'll make that statement again. The Washpool fire was ultimately declared out on 7 January 2020 after it had merged with the Mount Spirabo fire. I conclude this opening, Your Honour, with a comment on the impressive range of resources deployed to contain this fire. Numerous local, state, national and international resources were deployed, including firefighting and government agencies from New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, New Zealand and Canada. Various aircraft and heavy plant were relied on and utilised, not only to suppress the fire progression, but to buy time for crews to plan and safely undertake containment operations. So much is owed to their efforts, not least because there were no lives lost in this fire. Your Honour, I tender the brief of evidence into this inquiry into Washpool 2 fire. I understand it should be Exhibit 31, capital A.
Yes, thank you, Ms Stevens. That will be Exhibit 31, capital A.
Your Honour, I call the first witness, the officer in charge, Detective Acting Sergeant Travis Ware.
Detective, can you see and hear us? Are you able to see and hear us, Detective?
Yes, I am.
Yes, there you are. All right. The court officer will just now speak to you.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you. Ms Stevens.
Thank you. Can you hear and see me on the screen?
I can, yes.
Will you give your full name and rank to the court, please?
Travis John Ware. I'm a Detective Senior Constable.
Senior Constable, have you made a statement in regard to this inquiry dated 26th of October 2020?
I have, yes.
Have you got a copy of that statement in front of you?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to ask you some questions about the background to this investigation into the Washpool 2 fire and the previous fires. Can you tell the court, when were you appointed as the officer in charge of this investigation?
In August 2020.
And can you explain to the court, and I'll refer you to paragraph 4 of your statement, why this fire was recommended for investigation some time after it had burned?
So in, I believe it was late July 2020, the Strike Force Toronto Review and Support Team reviewed all bushfires for New South Wales. They referred a number of investigations to Coffs Clarence Police District, where I was allocated the officer in charge to oversee those investigations.
And at paragraph 5, you set out that the Washpool State Forest Kumbaja fire ignited on 30 October. When you use that term, are you referring to Washpool 1 or Washpool 2?
That would be Washpool 2.
In my questions to you today, Senior Constable, I'll be referring to the to the fire as Washpool 2 so as to not to confuse with that third fire.
Thank you.
Now, as a result of your appointment of the officer as the officer in charge, what steps did you take to investigate Washpool 2?
It began with canvassing a number of fire-affected properties that were provided to us through the building impact assessments that were undertaken. From that, we began to gather data and a significant amount of material from the Rural Fire Service. And then that also included the scene attendance by the Forensic and Technical Services, Senior Constable Drew, and also Mark Fuliga.
So did you request that an officer from, we'll call them FETs, and an officer from the RFS attend the scenes of Washpool 2?
I did, yes.
Is it the case that at that stage of your investigation, you and the officers who attended the scene were of the view that Washpool 2 may have been started by some other previous fires?
That's correct, yes.
And just to summarise and clarify for the court, those fires are in order of sequence. Firstly, the Second Creek fire, correct?
Yeah. Correct.
And next, the Red Bank Road fire.
That's right.
And then what we're referring to as Washpool 1 fire.
Yes.
And then the final fire, Washpool 2, which was the main focus of your investigations. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
And was it the case that Washpool 2 was the largest fire and significantly bigger than those other three fires?
Correct, yes.
Now, as part of your investigations, did you obtain some various records from the Bureau of Meteorology on lightning strikes?
I did, yes.
And at paragraph 16 of your statement, you refer to lightning strike data obtained from the RFS for a time period of 1st of August to the 10th of November 2019.
I did, yes.
And you've represented that data on the following page in a map. This is page 11 of the brief.
Correct, yep.
Now, just pausing there, have you been provided with and read a report by Mr. Woods in regard to this inquiry?
Yes.
And you've seen that he made various requests for lightning strike data for a number of different periods of time in regard to all four of these fires?
That's right, yeah.
And is some of the data that you've read on lightning strikes provided to Mr. Woods different to the one that you've represented in this statement?
Yes.
Do you have any explanation as to why that might be?
No, I'm not sure. We use different mapping systems for both when we provided the maps for Mr. Woods, but my only thoughts might be that I requested, when I downloaded the raw data from the RFS system for the initial plotting, was that it was for a shorter time period, and then Mr. Woods has requested for further to go back closer to July.
Thank you. In your statement, you've set out your opinion as to the summary of the cause and origin of the respective four fires.
Yeah.
And I just want to deal with them each in turn. Firstly, at paragraph 18, we deal with the first fire, which is Second Creek. Have you got that in your statement?
Yes.
Now, this fire was cited on the 17th of August 2019, and you've set out that your understanding is the RFS did not deem this fire to meet their criteria for the cause and origin investigation at the time.
I did, yes.
Are you aware of what that criteria is or was?
No, but I believe it's to do with building impacts or structural damage.
And as part of your investigation, this is in regard to that first fire, did you locate some satellite footage of what appears to be a smoking tree?
Yes.
Can you tell the court how that came about?
I went out to the Rural Fire Service Control Centre at Almara near Grafton. I met with the superintendent. It was relating to some mapping, just to interpret some of the mapping that they provided for the Liberation Trail fire. While I was there, they brought to my attention that they'd identified some satellite, when they were retrospectively reviewing the satellite imagery for the area, that they'd located what they believe, or what's referred to as a smoking tree.
I'll just show you a photograph from satellite imagery. Is that the image that you're talking about?
That is, yes.
And was that information provided to the FETS officer, Drew, and Mr. Fuliga when they attended on the scene, or was that afterwards?
My understanding, it was afterwards.
Now, turning to the second fire, Red Bank Road, you deal with this at paragraph 29 of your statement. This fire, you say, was cited first on the 8th of September 2019, and the point of origin was identified as about 400 metres north of that smoking tree, the first fire. Did you also request that Senior Constable Drew and Mr. Fuliga attend the assumed point of origin of that fire?
Yes, correct.
And what's your understanding of their views as to the cause of that fire?
They believe it was a reignition of the previous fire, the Second Creek fire.
I'll turn now to the third fire, which we're referring to as Washpool 1. And if you please turn to paragraph 36 of your statement. Now, this fire was identified on 9 October 2019. And from your statement, it's clear that the point of origin was about 1.2 kilometres north of the point of origin of that second fire. Again,
Yes.
Did you request those officers to attend the assumed area of origin of the scene of that fire?
I did, yes.
And what's your understanding as to their views in that regard?
They believe it was a reignition of either the Second Creek fire or the Red Bank fire, or a combination of both.
And just pausing there, in regard to the role to be played by Mr. Fuliga from the RFS, was it the case that you asked him to assist in your investigations, or did you understand that the RFS were conducting their own formal investigation at this time?
No, I requested he assist our Senior Constable Drew as part of our investigation.
And what was your expectation as to his role in that assisting capacity?
He would, his attendance, to be able to provide his opinion or interpretations of the scene as well.
If we turn now to paragraph 45, where you deal with Washpool 2 fire, which is the subject fire of this inquiry. Now, this fire was identified on the 30th of October 2019.
You're correct.
And you've set out that the RFS did not deem this fire to meet their criteria for cause and origin of the investigation at the time. Can you elaborate on your understanding of that or not?
No, I can't.
Now, there was some damage to property as a result of Washpool 2, is that right?
There was, yes.
And you've outlined 9 residential properties that had damage or destruction. Did you attend any or all of those properties?
I've attended every one that I could access. So it was all but one.
I'll just show you 3 photographs, that is some selected photographs. The first one at page 188. This is a property at Barrett's Creek Road in Barrett's Creek.
That's right.
Are you familiar with that photograph?
At the Lollbacks property, yes.
Where's Barrett's Creek with reference to the other major towns in the area?
To the east, northeast.
When you attended this property, were you able to speak with the actual owners on the ground, or were they not there?
There was no one present at the time, but I know the family, so I spoke to them after.
I'll show you the second photograph in this selection, which is page 190. Are you familiar with this photograph?
That's right. Yes.
That's Coaldale Road in Barrett's Creek, is that right?
It is.
The third photograph we have is at page 191. This is also at Coaldale Road in Barrett's Creek. Is this a different property to the previous photograph?
I was
You're not sure?
I believe that's the same property from a different angle.
Was all of the dwellings and sheds on this property damaged, or did some of it remain intact?
No, they were damaged quite significantly.
And have you been in a position to speak to any of these people again about how they're faring or whether they've been able to rebuild?
No, I haven't.
Now, in regard to this fourth fire and the role of Senior Constable Drew and also Mr. Fuliga, what's your understanding as to whether they were actually able to attend the fire scene?
Not for Washpool 2, no, due to the terrain and the difficulties in reaching it with the road conditions or the trail conditions to try and access it.
So their analysis, what was the basis upon which they reached their conclusions?
They relied on the indicators for where they could get to, where they could reach, but also just the mapping and the line scan imagery.
Just show you 2 photographs from Mr. Senior Constable Drew's report. And the first is a map from the Red Bank fire, and this is in regard to the angle of char that they examined, and this is at page 92. Was this one of the photographs that was provided to you by Senior Constable Drew following their examination of that first fire?
Yes, it was.
And what was explained to you about what that photograph meant?
The regrowth. It's quite significant.
Did Senior Constable Drew or Mr. Fuliga explain to you any limitations of going back and examining the area so many months after the event?
A lot of the macro indicators that they refer to during their examinations had been lost due to the time period and the regrowth.
And I'll show you a second photograph. This is at page 97. This is another photograph taken by Senior Constable Drew of the angle of char observed on trees in the Second Creek fire region. Again, did Senior Constable Drew explain any limitations or any of his observations in regard to that image?
He did, yes, but I'll just have to bring it up.
The image is at page 97 of the brief, which for you is page 6 of Senior Constable Drew's report internally.
So on page 6 of his statement.
Yes.
It's stated there that it's a general view showing angle of char on trees and regrowth to vegetation in the Second Creek fire.
And is it your understanding that that photograph, among the other selected photographs, is part of the basis of his opinion as to the direction of the fire at that time?
Yes, that's right.
And is it in part, does it explain in part why he reached the view that this may be a continuous series of fires rather than all independent fires?
I believe it is, yes.
Now, have you had the benefit of reading Mr. Woods's report?
I have.
And you can see from his report that he's of the view that each of these fires is undetermined, as in the cause is undetermined. And he's also of the view that he can't say whether it was one continuous fire or separate fires. Have you read that?
Yes, I have.
And do you have any comment on that, given you were the officer in charge of this investigation, or anything you'd like to convey to the court about that opinion?
No, my opinion was based on the mapping and the imagery that I was provided, that they were very similar. They were very close proximity from the edges of the preceding fires to where I guess you could say the approximate point of origin for the following.
So do you have any particular view as to Mr. Woods's opinion that there's not enough information to say for sure whether it is in fact one continuous fire in the circumstances?
Yes.
Your Honour, those are my questions of the officer in charge.
Thank you, Ms Stevens. Mr Newton, do you have any questions?
Your Honour, I have no questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Detective. You're excused.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honour. I call the next witness, Mark Fuliga.
Mr Fuliga, are you there? Can you see and hear us? There we can see you. Can you see and hear us, Mr Fuliga?
I can.
Excellent. You'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr Fuliga. Ms Stevens.
Mr Fuliga, can you hear and see me?
Yes, I can.
Can you give your full name to the court, please?
Mark Wentworth Fuliga.
And your employment and your role?
Work for the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. My role is training coordinator for the Fire Investigation and Compliance Unit.
Is it the case, Mr. Fuliga, that you completed what's referred to as a fire investigation review of the Washpool 2 fires? Or fire,
That
I'm
is
sorry.
correct. That is correct.
Have you got a copy of that review in front of you?
I do.
Now, there's no date on this document. Can you tell the court when it was created?
That would have been early November 2020.
You've also completed a statement recently that provides some further information about this review. Have you got a copy of that?
I do.
Oh, yes, I do. This is dated the 3rd of March 2022.
Correct.
Now, can you just explain to the court, please, Mr. Fuliga, what was your role as you understood it when you were contacted by the officer in charge of this fire investigation?
Yes, to assist the forensic officer in the investigation of the 4 fires up in that area.
And is that a different role to that of conducting an RFS fire investigation yourself?
Yes, it is.
What steps would you usually take to undertake your own fire investigation for the RFS at the outset?
At the obtain initial incident details, persons on scene, as in first responding crews, etc., weather data, and any other pertinent information, as in where there's been previous fires in the area.
So is it the case that you had no role in regard to any investigation or review of these fires until it was almost 1 year later, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And when you were asked to assist in this review, what steps did you take to familiarise yourself with the information about Washpool 2 fire?
For the Washpool 2 fire, I went onto the services incident management system, ICON, and obtained data from there.
And can you explain to the court how your access to that system works, especially in circumstances where the fires had all been declared out?
Yeah, just using my service login, having access through to that, and putting in the ICON number into the system, and it'll bring up all the data for me.
And as at around that time, if you had determined that it was useful to undertake your own investigation for the RFS, would you have been able to do so at that time?
We could have, but as it had been deemed out at the time, we were unable then to access any of our fire investigation templates for that incident.
So when you say templates, what do you mean?
Our fire investigation templates that we put our reports into.
And is that still the case at the current time?
No, that's not. That has been changed so that we can actually change that to a incident to be investigated.
You've read some of the remarks made by Mr. Woods in his report in regard to the cause and origin of these 4 fires, is that right?
I have, yes.
And he refers to some limitations in the methodology employed in regard to your review. Are you familiar with those parts of his report?
I am.
And what comment can you make by way of explanation from your role in response to those comments?
Yeah, the location of the 4 fires, well, the 3 fires being Redbank, Washpool 1 and Washpool 2, made it very difficult due to the terrain, regrowth of the vegetation, to actually undertake a proper fire investigation using methodology that we would normally use. Especially the Redbank one, the terrain there was very steep and unable to walk. without falling over.
And is it the case that you and Senior Constable Drew were not able to actually examine the Washpool 2 fire ground?
That is correct.
And can you explain to the court, from your perspective, on the ground, why was that?
We made a number of attempts through different fire trails or tracks in the area, but we were thwarted by fallen trees whichever way we tried to get into it.
And did you try on 2 occasions? That is, firstly on the 14th of August 2020 and then again on the 25th of September 2020?
That is correct, yes.
So in regards to your review report, if I can call it that, was this created for your purposes or for the purposes of the New South Wales Police in investigating this fire?
It was created for my purposes and the RFS, but it was also supplied to New South Wales Police as part of our normal procedures.
Now, in that review, you refer to scene assessments, and there were 2, weren't there? As I said, firstly on the 14th of August and secondly on the 25th of September. Now, that first scene assessment, which of the fires did you assess at that time?
I'll just have to check my notes on that one. On the 14th of August.
Yes.
Was the Washpool 1.
Did you also attend the location of the of any of the other fires at that time?
I don't think we attempted on that day to get into Washpool 2, but that was one of the days we couldn't get through.
Okay, so you successfully attended one of the locations on that day, and tried to attend the location of Washpool 2.
Correct. Yes.
And is it the case that during those assessments you considered that these fires may have been started by earlier fires?
That we started to form that opinion at that point, yes.
And those other 2 fires were known as Second Creek Fire and Red Bank Road Fire, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
So from your review, it seems that you then went to the location of those other 2 fires a few weeks later in September. Is that what happened?
That's correct, yes.
And when you reviewed, when you examined the fire grounds of those areas, what conclusions did you reach?
With the Second Creek fire, my conclusion was it was undetermined. We couldn't find any area of ignition at that point. And any lightning data showed that there was no lightning in the area, and we couldn't find any lightning strikes within that fire area that we investigated.
Did you have access to comprehensive lightning data in regard to all 4 fires at that time?
Not at that time, no.
In your comments of your scene assessments for all of these fires, you refer to the existence or otherwise of hard containment lines. Can you explain to the court what you mean by that term, please?
Yeah, hard containment line is either existing road, fire trail, walking track that's mineral earth.
And just focusing... Sorry, continue.
I was just going to say, and then other hard containment lines are man-made using machinery.
So when you observed the areas of the first 2 fires, could you see any evidence of hard containment lines?
Other than the existing tracks and trails in the area, there was no other evidence of any hard containment lines being constructed by machinery or human.
And what about in regard to the 3rd fire, Washpool 1?
No, we couldn't. We're, again, natural roads and tracks, but we could not see any further containment by construction in any way.
So that opinion is a result of your observations on the ground at the time?
Just my observations on the ground, yes.
And can you tell the court about any limitations that you had in terms of making those assessments, given so many months had passed since the fires?
Well, just the remoteness of the country, the regrowth, it made it very difficult to be moving around, both in vehicle and on foot.
And in regard to the fourth fire, the Washpool 2 fire, your opinion is based on line scan review, is that right?
That's correct, line scan review.
And various maps that you obtained from the RFS database?
And the mapping that was obtained from the RFS.
Now, as I foreshadowed earlier, you've read the opinion of Mr. Woods in regard to the cause of each of the 4 fires, and his view is that they are all undetermined. You're aware of that?
I am.
Do you have any comment to make about his opinions about each of those fires being undetermined in the circumstances?
As a fire investigator, he's entitled to, his opinions on the cause, origin and cause. So, yeah.
Is it the case that he has had some access to material that you weren't able to have access to at the time?
I can't answer that.
But well, you gave some evidence earlier about not having access to comprehensive lightning strike data, for example.
Well, if he's obtained that, yes, he has received additional information.
And does it remain your view or not that this is likely, that Washpool 2 was likely a reignition of previous fires, or that you're just not sure on the evidence whether you can say that?
I stand by my determination on that fire.
And that is that it's a reignition of Washpool 1 or possibly of all of the 3 fires?
Correct. Reignition of Washpool 1 and a reignition from the other ones as well.
Thank you, Mr. Fuliga. Your Honour, those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fuliga, I'll just see if there's any other questions. Mr. Newton.
Yeah, just a few, Your Honour. Mr. Fuliga, can you hear me?
I can.
You've mentioned on a number of occasions the remote location. Can you just explain to Her Honour how it was that you attended the location?
Via motor vehicle, off Red Bank Road.
And in terms of getting firstly to the area of the Second Creek fire, was it necessary to go through a locked gate?
It was necessary to go through a private residence gate.
And when one talks about Red Bank Road, can you just describe the condition of what is known as Red Bank Road?
Whilst it is a designated road, it's the best way to describe it in places is like a goat track.
And is it right that on Red Bank Road there was grass growing as high as the window of the vehicle that you're in?
That's correct, yes.
And in terms of the location, what was the closest residential dwelling to that location that you observed?
That was the property, the private gate we went to, which is probably about 700 metres off Cardham Road, I think it was. When we turned onto Red Bank Road, there was a property about 700 metres down, which was the private gate we went through.
And how long after going through the private gate was it before you got to the area that you understand to be the general area?
Approximately an hour.
And in terms of the terrain, how would you describe the terrain where the general area of origin of the fires were?
Steep forested country.
And is it right that it would be that in that country, it may well be very difficult to use heavy machinery and the like to construct what you've described as hard containment lines?
It would certainly take an effort to get any machinery in there, yes.
Is it also right that in some circumstances, when fighting fires in a remote location, that firefighters will seek to use natural features in order to contain fires burning within a remote location?
That's correct.
Sorry, I didn't hear the answer to that question.
Sorry, that's correct.
And a natural feature that firefighters might seek to use might be creek beds, for example.
Correct.
Yes, no further questions, Your Honour.
Thank you, Mr Newton. Anything arising?
Nothing arising, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Mr Fuliga. That's the end of your
Thank you,
evidence.
Your Honour.
Thank you.
Your Honour, is it a convenient time to take the morning tea adjournment?
Sure. We'll take the morning adjournment and we'll resume at 11:40.
Silence, please, on stand. you.
Yes, Ms Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honour. I call Richard Woods.
Mr Woods, can you see and hear us?
I can, thank you, Your Honour.
Right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr Woods. Ms Stevens.
Mr Woods, can you see and hear me?
I can, thank you.
Will you give your full name to the court, please?
Richard John Woods.
And your expertise in regard to the nature of these proceedings?
I've had a role in wildfire investigation extending back to 1994 when I first undertook some training in wildfire investigation. And that's progressed over the years since to investigating many fires. And in 2000, I was appointed by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service to establish wildfire investigation for that agency. And I worked in that role for up to 9 years, and then transferred to Canberra and became the operations manager for the ACT Rural Fire Service, at the same time undertaking wildfire investigation work here, and both at a local and national level on behalf of the Attorney General's Department.
Mr Woods, have you provided a report to those assisting Her Honour in regard to the cause of the series of bushfires in the Washpool State Forest?
Yes, I have.
And do you have a copy of that report in front of you?
I do.
And the date of that report is the 7th of February 2022.
That's correct.
Now, in preparing your report, Mr Woods, is it the case that you have not examined any of the fire scenes on the ground, but you have formed your opinions based on a review of the other documents provided to you?
That's correct.
You were asked a series of questions to which you've responded in your report, and the first area of questions is about the concept of the reignition of bushfires generally, and then separately you've been asked some questions about your views on the cause of each of the 4 Washpool fires. I'm going to ask you some questions about each of those matters, and we will start with the general questions about the risks of reignition in bushfires. Can you just tell the court at the outset, is reignition of a bushfire a risk to be managed in fire containment? And if so, how is it managed?
It certainly is a risk. And the whole aim of containment and suppression of wildfires is to ensure that a fire doesn't reignite and then cause further lands to be impacted by uncontrolled fire. So one of the aims is to construct containment lines and then allow fire crews, be it them on foot or on vehicle, to access those areas and then suppress either a fire edge or conduct proactive steps such as backburning. And backburning is basically removing the fuel between the containment line and the active area of fire. And fundamentally, the issue concerned with a reignition can happen at any point along that containment line, from either embedded fire into logs or large dead trees, and those materials then not being observed by firefighters, and then consequently continuing to burn after they've left the scene, and then embers or fire then transferring across the containment line due to the impact of wind or so forth. The other aspect is when fire is still burning within a contained area and a flare-up may occur, and that then results in a spot fire jumping the containment line and then causing a new ignition on the uncontrolled edge of the containment line.
In your experience, is there a spectrum in terms of the period of time that might elapse between a fire considered to be out but then a subsequent reignition?
it really hinges around the conditions that the firefighters are facing at the time. For instance, if the fire danger rating is peaking during the containment process and the subsequent patrolling process, that may well prolong the management and the patrol of that containment line to ensure, for instance, when high winds occur, that there's no spot overs or heightened activity. So it really depends on the environmental conditions at the time.
Do you have any further comment to make in regard to this risk with reference to the particular conditions that we all experienced in the 2019-2020 bushfires?
I'm certainly aware the conditions were described as, in some instances, unprecedented over the fact that there was prolonged drought, and that then had an impact on the landscape and obviously the fuel conditions. And in some of the review material that I've researched, it was found that a lot of the containment procedures and processes that would normally be successful during a normal year of environmental conditions were not successful on many fires because conditions were so dry. In other words, fires were continuing to burn at higher intensity during the evening period, which normally would see them reduced, and conditions of, for instance, embedded fire within logs and dead trees, in many instances saw a lot of that fuel totally consumed because of the intensity of the fire and the drought conditions and the very low fuel moisture content of those logs and materials. So when one looks back on the conditions that were faced at the time, they weren't considered normal, let's say.
We've heard some evidence today about the use of containment lines in managing bushfires, such as those in the Washpool State Forest. Can you explain to the court your understanding of the difference between hard and soft containment lines?
Certainly, a hard containment line is a deliberate action on behalf of the incident management team to embark fire crews to go and construct a clear line, that is, removing vegetation in and around a active fire to prevent the fire from then breaching that line. And that can be either using hand tools in a hand tool crew using firefighters on foot, or it may be using a bulldozer or heavy machinery to construct an access track for fire tankers to get in and perform that same role. Whereas a soft containment line might be the use of a dry creek bed or a area of cleared land, or for instance, it might be a pasture country which has been drought affected, hasn't got fuel loads there to allow the fire to progress across that area. And there may not be a formal containment line put in place, but nevertheless, the anticipation is that the fire will not breach that area because of the lack of fuel.
Mr. Woods, your ultimate view is that in regard to each of the three fires, the cause is undetermined. I'd like to take you through each of the four fires now and ask you to explain the reasons why you formed that view. And we'll start with the first fire, Second Creek fire. Now, you deal with this in your report at paragraph 44. Before I ask you in particular about the content of that paragraph, when we look at this first fire, is it the case that you were provided with a satellite image of a smoking tree that was taken on the 13th of August 2019?
That's correct.
And can you tell the court, from your experience, the period of time in which a tree in those circumstances may have been ignited and would smoke in the manner in which we can see on the satellite image?
It can be days, weeks, or in some instances even months. And essentially what can inhibit the combustion of the fuel or the dead tree timber is the condition of that timber. And if the condition is, for instance, has a high fuel moisture content, that inhibits the burning process or the combustion process. And therefore, for an example, if a tree was struck by lightning and it did have this high fuel moisture content, it can smoulder within the heartwood or the inner part of the tree for many, many weeks and only emerge after weather conditions make it more prominent for fire to escape, such as high winds, or a breach of the structure of the tree itself, which might see a large limb drop, and then that fire then spreads to the surrounding vegetation.
Are you able to make any comment about how long that tree may have been burning from viewing that satellite image or not?
Not really. It's very hard to tell. And when I look at that image, it appears to be quite a substantial amount of smoke, albeit it's not an intense fire because of the fact there's white smoke that's emitting. But it may well have spread to some surrounding vegetation in a limited form at that point. But it certainly, when that occurred, when that ignition occurred, it's very awkward to tell based on a single image.
Now, in regard to this first fire, you've referred in your report to a guide that you've referred to as the NWCG Guide to Wildland Fire Origin and Cause Determination Handbook. What does NWCG stand for?
That's the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group. It's a United States-based organisation which identifies a lot of the training standards for wildfire practices, for instance, in training and in methodology for the use of aircraft and the like. And I sit on a wildland fire investigation subcommittee, and we drew together that manual a number of years ago based on best practice in Canada, the US, New Zealand and Australia.
So when you mention in your report the accepted methodology in terms of investigating a fire of this nature, are you referring to the criteria that's set out in that handbook?
Correct. That's the internationally recommended and accepted methodology.
And is it the case that there are a series of potential causes that you or any investigator should consider when making an assessment about the cause of a bushfire?
That's right. There's a series of recognised causes worldwide that are put into those categories.
In regard to this first fire at 44 and onwards, you've gone through each of these various potential causes, and I'll just take you to some of the more relevant ones. You've identified campfire and smoking as being unlikely to be responsible for the ignition of that first fire, correct?
Indeed, yes.
And then the next is deliberate, as in a deliberate act by a person, and you consider that to be unresolved just because of the lack of evidence in that regard?
Indeed, and one of the specific issues there is the location of that smoke plume in respect of the forest and the private property.
The next is juveniles or children, and you see no evidence of that, and you eliminate that as a cause, is that right?
Correct.
The next is the category known as debris burning, and you've said in your report at 56, the area where this wildfire was assumed to have ignited appears to be on private cleared farmland bordering on the Washpool State Forest. Can you explain to the court what your understanding is of the definition of debris burning?
That's when land management practices might see an area burnt off for the purpose of clearing vegetation or piled up timber in a windrow or in a bonfire situation to remove those remnant particles or areas of timber. So it's actually a result of a land management practice. It can also extend to fuel reduction burning undertaken by fire agencies as well.
And you consider that cause to be unresolved. By that, do you mean there's not enough evidence to say whether that could be the cause?
Correct.
The next is equipment use, and that is unresolved. Is that for the same reasons? That is, you don't know whether any machinery was used in the area and may have caused the fire?
That's correct.
You've eliminated the next potential cause of railway because there is no infrastructure in the area. And then we come to the penultimate criteria, which is miscellaneous, and you say, this category includes common causes such as fireworks, cutting, welding and grinding, firearms use and glass refraction. Can you explain to the court whether and how reignition or escapes of fire fits into the criteria that we've just gone through?
It actually fits within the miscellaneous cause. It's a recognised reignition cause under that category.
And when we use the word escapes, do you mean reignition?
Indeed, yes.
And you consider, in regard to this first fire, that to be unresolved. And why is that?
Purely, again, there's not enough evidence that points towards that cause as to whether there was any burning off or any activities that occurred there weeks, if not months, prior to this fire occurring, and therefore lack of evidence. I can't provide a opinion as to whether it was termed to be that cause.
The final criteria in this handbook that you've referred to is that of lightning, and you set out, this is at paragraph 66, the lightning is recognised as a competent ignition source of wildfires, particularly after periods of reduced rainfall and low fuel moisture content. And you make some comments in regard to the use of lightning strike data. Can you explain to the court your a summary, as it were, about any margin of error and the use of lightning strike data in making assessments of cause?
Certainly, the lightning strike data is used worldwide, and it's based on the recording of lightning strikes essentially as they occur. The system is not infallible, however. There's a margin of error there of around about 500 metres, which is recognised in the determination and interpretation, rather, of lightning strike data. And furthermore, there's also not every lightning strike is recorded because of the anomalies in the systems that are used. So it's used as a guide, essentially, to as an indication of fire cause.
And is it your understanding that when New South Wales Police first investigated these fires, which was around a year after they burned, that there was no comprehensive lightning strike data available?
Yes, I believe so, yeah, on the information I was provided.
And have you been provided, for the purposes of your report, selected lightning strike data in regard to the period of time of the assumed time of origin for each of these fires?
I have, yes.
And again, focusing on the first fire, Second Creek fire, you were provided with a map of the lightning strike data for the period of the 3rd of August to the 17th of August 2019. And just pausing there, that last date is the date of the presumed ignition. I'll just show you this map. This is at index number 4, please. Can you see that, Mr. Wood?
I can.
And it's the case that during that period of a number of weeks prior to the ignition of that first fire, there were, according to this data, no lightning strikes in the area. Is that right?
That's correct.
So from that, are you able to eliminate lightning as a cause?
Based on that information alone, yes.
Your words were that you believe this cause is unlikely in this event, and then you eliminate it in the circumstances.
Indeed, yes.
And your view is that that first fire is undetermined in terms of its cause.
Correct.
Now, moving on to the second fire, Red Bank Road fire, there was a period of 9 days that elapsed between information that that first fire was declared out and the ignition of this second fire, the Red Bank Road fire. The key question for you here is whether or not, in your view, this second fire was caused by the reignition of the first fire.
It is possible. However, based on the information I've received, there's no direct evidence that points me to the fact that this has occurred.
And what would be a good example of direct evidence in these circumstances that you might rely on?
Essentially doing a scene examination which would identify the fire progression back to an area where a fire has breached a containment line, or there's been identification of where one fire has stopped and the second fire has then progressed on. And that can be substantiated by fire crews that might have been in attendance at the time, or patrolling crews as to exactly where they were familiar with the fire edge being contained and then the subsequent fire being identified.
I was going to show you in turn 2 maps that you've produced in your report. The first being at page 97-9 of your report. And this is a copy of a map that was originally in Senior Constable Ware's statement. I'll just let that come up on the screen. Can you see that there?
I can.
Now, have you made an analysis of these? I'll start again. Can you explain what analysis you've undertaken in regard to that map?
I identified the prevailing weather conditions close to the time when that fire was first reported. I believe at Grafton, which was approximately 75 kilometres away from this area. But the prevailing wind was coming from that direction as marked with the green arrow. When I view that in relation to the fire plot, or the map of the fire there, the Second Creek fire, the direction of wind is consistent with where a fire may well have occurred as a result of breach of a containment line.
And on that map, the green arrow is superimposed on a hatched area. That represents the first fire, doesn't it? That is the Second Creek fire. Is that right?
That's right.
And then the dots surrounding the second area above it, that's the area of, at the time, the second fire. Is that right?
That's right. That's my understanding.
On the left-hand side of that dotted area, there's a red marker, and that's the assumed ignition point of that second fire. Is that right?
That's it, yes.
So is the purpose of this analysis to show that it is possible in the circumstances that, in part due to the prevailing winds, that first fire did in fact cause the second?
That's my message in this diagram, is to identify that wind influence may well have caused that spot over or ignition from the first fire.
And then turning to the next map, which for you is overleaf in your report at paragraph 15, and it's at page 97-10 of the brief. We'll bring this up on the screen, Mr. Woods. Might just enlarge it a bit more if we can. So this is a line scan from Senior Constable Ware's statement at 2:53 a.m. on the 9th of September. the 9th of September being the day after that second fire ignited, you have placed some red arrows that focus on what appears to be some spot fires. Can you explain to the court what analysis you've undertaken here?
What I've identified is obviously through the use of the infrared data imagery is some of those hotspots that were obviously on the northern edge or northeastern edge of the Second Creek fire. And in that general vicinity of what appears to be Red Bank Road, it's somewhat blurry, but nevertheless, it identifies that there was certainly some active fire in and around the Second Creek fire, whilst the following fire, that being the Red Bank Road fire, was subsequently identified.
And does this mean that from this line scan, it must follow that the Second Creek fire, which is the first fire in time, was in fact still ignited in part at that time because we can see the spot fires?
That's my interpretation of what's occurred there. What I don't have the benefit of is the exact fire boundary of the Second Creek fire in relation to where that infrared activities occurring. However, I've assumed that it falls roughly in line with the mapping that I've been provided.
And it's the case that as at this date, according to the information provided by RFS, that first fire had been declared out. That's your understanding?
Correct.
And it had been out for about 9 or 10 days, again, according to the information or the documents provided by RFS.
That's right.
So is it possible, and perhaps we just don't know, that there were parts of that first fire that in fact were not entirely out as at that date of the 9th of September?
It certainly is possible. And nevertheless, though, the Royal Fire Service situation reports were identifying that fire as being out and the information that I was provided. However, if there was, as I explained earlier, if there was undetected areas that were still smouldering, the conditions may well have flared those unburnt areas within the fire boundary.
And that view is subject to the caveats you just set out, which is it's not clear from this information exactly what the boundaries, where the boundaries of the two fires are.
That's right, yes.
And you got, having made that analysis in regard to those two maps, you go on at paragraph 16 to say, it is possible that the influence of the southwesterly wind on the previously burnt Second Creek Washpool State Forest fire may have enhanced any remaining smouldering fuel near the northern eastern containment edge of this fire, resulting in embers being carried by the wind or the movement of fire burning in vegetation progressing across the containment line, resulting in the ignition of the Red Bank Road fire.
That's right.
And having said that, what's your ultimate view on the cause of this second fire?
My view is, again, based on the time frame since the fire occurred and the ability for the investigators to actually access that area, which I recognise can be very problematic after that period. One of the concerns I have is that we haven't found exactly where this fire has moved from the Second Creek fire to the Red Bank Road fire. And furthermore, there's abilities within the methodology to identify, even after the event, that exact ignition area, if at all possible, because we haven't been able to identify that. And I certainly understand investigators Fuliga has tried to piece that case together, but given the passage of time and the precise location of where this occurred, not being able to identify it, and then to take into account other fire cause categories, I cannot determine what the cause of that fire was.
And can we just now deal with the final potential criteria in terms of cause, and that is lightning? You were provided with lightning strike data in regard to the relevant time period for this second fire, correct?
That's right.
And the range that you were provided was between the 25th and the 30th of August. Is that right? One moment.
You can refer me to my.
Sorry, that might be incorrect. Just one moment and I'll clarify. Sorry, it should be between the 25th of August and the 8th of September.
Yes, that's correct.
Which is the 2 weeks or so prior to the assumed ignition of that second fire, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And I'll just show you the data on screen. This is at index number 5, please. Can you see that, Mr. Woods?
I can.
Now, this represents that time period of 2 or so weeks before the ignition, and it identifies that on only the 29th and the 30th of August, there were 18 lightning strikes. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
So there were, after the 30th of August, there were no other lightning strikes leading up to the presumed date of ignition. How does that assist you in your assessment as to whether lightning could be a cause of this fire rather than the possible reignition?
It provides evidence of lightning activity in the area, and as I alluded to before, not every lightning strike is recorded by the detection systems. So therefore, given the circumstances, it confirms to me that there was certainly lightning activity that may have been responsible for the ignition in this instance.
And taking all those matters into account, is it the case that you remain of the view that that second fire cause is simply undetermined?
Correct, based on the need to identify an ignition area and then tie that into a cause, which under these circumstances was very problematic.
Turn now to the third fire, Mr. Woods, and this is commencing in your report at paragraph 105. You've again gone through the various criteria that we've already outlined and considered which of those may be responsible as a cause. Again, campfire and smoking is unlikely to be responsible for the fire. The deliberate acts, again, are unresolved. Is it the case for the same reasons as earlier, that is, you don't have enough evidence?
Yes, similar circumstances, correct.
You've eliminated cause by juveniles or children. And then the next category is debris burning. And you make a comment, and this is at paragraph 116, that I note that the investigators have described this category, as in debris burning, of cause to represent escapes. However, as previously outlined, this category is aligned with the escape of managed vegetation burning operations, be they to reduce fuel loads or eliminate windrow stacked vegetation. Can you explain what you mean by that comment, please?
Again, based on the location where we're talking about a managed state forest, normally fuel reduction strategies include prescribed burning, and in some instances there's occasions when prescribed burns can break out at a later date, when conditions deteriorate. However, in this instance, there was certainly no evidence of any prescribed burning, particularly around this time of year, and given the conditions, it's highly unlikely that there would have been any of that activity occurring, and there was no evidence provided to me that suggested that was had been occurring in the past in that area.
So for those reasons, you eliminate that cause and you go on to make an assessment of the remaining potential causes. Equipment use is unresolved, correct?
Indeed.
And railway is eliminated. And then when we come to miscellaneous again, you say that this is where a reignition should be formally considered, is that right?
That's correct.
And is it the case that in your view, similarly to the last fire, you say reignition is possible, but we don't have enough evidence to make a determination that it was a positive example of reignition?
That's correct.
And you deal with this in more detail back at paragraph 21 of your report. I'll just ask you to go back there, Mr. Woods.
Yes. Yep.
And you say, the influence of the wind direction at the time suggests it is plausible that any remnant smouldering fuel near the northern and western boundaries of the Second Creek fire and Red Bank Road fire possibly resulted in embers being carried by the wind or the movement of fire burning and vegetation progressing north. And you go on to explain and extract what appears to be some example of some containment lines in the area. Can you explain your observations in that regard?
Yes, and some of the documentation I was provided, the incident action plan, which is formulated by the incident controller and his team in managing this incident, actually referred to on page 128 of the brief of evidence I was provided, where there was identified objectives, and it was stated, as I've said in paragraph 23, that part of that process was to identify, scope, develop and containment options. And further on, it mentions about ground reconnaissance of close and medium containment options and establish close containment lines with a dozer as required. And even further to establish close containment control lines and manage fire as approached, which in essence alludes to me the fact that there was containment strategies in place that were being both suggested and undertaken to contain that fire. So I would expect that at some point there would have been certainly a containment line constructed based on that strategy that was identified by the incident controller.
And does that suggest to you that it is less likely that the cause of that third fire was reignition in the circumstances because there was some containment of those previous two fires?
Certainly, if there was no containment line, the opportunity for a breach from one fire to the next is very possible. However, based on what I've read here, there was a strategy in place to construct those containment lines. Now, whether they are actually completed is unclear in the information I was provided.
And turning now to the last criteria in regard to your assessment of this cause of this third fire, and that is again lightning. At paragraph 98 of your report, you refer to the provision of some further lightning strike data in regard to this fire. And we know that this fire was ignited on the 9th of October, and the range that you were provided was between the 25th of September and the 9th of October. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I'll show you this map of the data. This is in Index 6. We just enlarge that a little, please. It might be hard to see on the screen, Mr. Woods, but is it the case that there are in fact 2 strikes within that red perimeter?
That's correct, on the 26th of September 2019.
So relying on this data, you can say that within that time period there are only 2 strikes that have been recorded, and those strikes were over a week, almost 2 weeks before the ignition of that Washpool 1 fire.
Correct.
And given that data, what's your assessment as to lightning as a potential cause of this fire?
I've alluded to the fact that it's possible, because there may have been other recorded or other lightning strikes that weren't recorded by the detection system. However, at this point, I'm unable to say whether it was probable, and therefore I've left it as unresolved at that point.
Thank you. And turning now to the final fire, which is Washpool 2. And as you know, this is the fire that is the focus of this inquiry today. And of course, the fire that was the largest of all of the 4 by far. If I ask you to turn to paragraph 139, you've set out in your review of the material that there was no examination of the fire ground at Washpool 2, is that right?
That's correct.
And that you've relied on the records otherwise provided to you in order to determine the cause. You go through the various criteria as we've done in regard to the other fires. And again, campfire and smoking are unlikely, is that right?
That's correct.
A deliberate act is unresolved as per your assessment of the other fires.
Indeed, correct.
Juvenile and children is eliminated.
Correct.
Debris burning, in the sense that you understand it according to the handbook, is eliminated.
Yes.
Equipment use is unresolved.
Correct.
Railway is eliminated.
Correct.
When we turn to miscellaneous, you consider again the possibility of reignition. And just pausing there, is it the possibility of reignition by any of the 3 previous fires?
Certainly over that period. Obviously more likely to be the preceding fire that occurred there, and that more close proximity being Washpool 1 fire. However, again, based on purely on the information I've been provided, yeah, it's a possibility, but no clarity around the evidence of size cause.
And you're aware that Mr. Fuliga and Senior Constable Drew are of the view that the Washpool 2 fire was a continuous fire that is caused in part by one or more of the other 3 fires.
Yes.
What comment do you make on that opinion?
Look, obviously they haven't also had the ability to access that area, which again is observation, not a criticism. That occurs based on the time period since the fire, and under those circumstances, without having the clarity of interpretation of the 11 categories of fire pattern indicator, not just angle of chart, and identifying fire progression back to where this fire originated, it's very much reliant on other circumstantial evidence, which has obviously formed their opinion. My opinion is the fact that the fires themselves, or in this instance, the Washpool 2 fire, the origin of that area hasn't been clearly identified and with all the handicaps of time, the ability to do that is obviously swaying my opinion to say, well, we don't know where the origin is, we don't know the ignition area, we don't know, therefore, the linkage of one fire to the next, or indeed if there was other cause categories that I've alluded to previously.
If we turn to the final potential cause, and that is again lightning, you were provided with some lightning strike data for the period of time prior to the ignition date. Now, the ignition date was the 30th of October, and the date range of the data provided to you was the 16 October to 30 October range. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
We'll show you that final map. Now, this indicates many, many strikes of lightning in the period. Is that right?
Indeed. Certainly a storm has impacted across a wide range of that area of the North Coast, yeah.
And you've referred to it as extensive lightning activity recorded over the time frame. But you've also said there is no specific lightning strike that can be aligned to the ignition of this event, as the scene examination did not identify the likely ignition area. So in those circumstances, how much can you rely on this data in terms of determining lightning as a cause?
Again, it's circumstantial evidence. It provides lightning is a reliable cause of the bushfire and wildfire. And what this map provides is the fact that there was lightning leading up to the ignition on the 30th of October of the Washpool 2 fire. And so therefore, in the process of elimination of that cause, ordinarily it would be a matter of taking that into account and then identifying where that ignition area occurred, and then looking for the lightning struck tree that might be aligned close to that ignition area of the fire. Again, we don't have the luxury of doing that in this instance, and therefore what it provides to me is some circumstantial evidence of lightning activity that may have contributed to this ignition.
And is it for those reasons that you've ultimately formed the view that Washpool 2, the cause of Washpool 2 is undetermined?
Yes, I've looked at the infrared activity, or records rather, of the fire occurring from Washpool 1 and in that vicinity that are provided. Again, circumstantial evidence, but we haven't been able to identify precisely where this fire ignited, and hence take into account all those other fire cause categories and eliminate ones I've said has been unresolved.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Your Honour, those are my questions of this witness.
Thank you. Mr. Woods, I'm just going to see if Mr. Newton has any questions for you. Mr. Newton.
No, Your Honour, I have no questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Woods, for your very useful evidence today. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honour. That concludes the oral evidence in this inquiry. And if it's suitable, I will turn to some closing remarks. Your Honour has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the brief in Exhibit 31 A. Your Honour has also heard from the oral evidence of Senior Constable Travis Ware and the RFS fire investigator Mark Fuliga, and finally Mr. Woods as an expert commissioned in these proceedings. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address you on the cause and origin of the Washpool 2 fire. In that regard, I foreshadow that formal submissions are likely to be made that the Washpool 2 fire ignited on or around 30 October 2019 in an area proximate to the Red Bank Road in the Washpool State Forest. The cause of the fire remains undetermined due to insufficient evidence. And Your Honour, I would ask that you formally stand this matter over to the 5th of September 2022.
Yes, I do that now. Thank you, Ms Stephens.
Your Honour, that closes proceedings for today, and on Monday we have the inquiry into the Kangawalla fire commencing.
All right, unless there's anything that Mr Newton wishes to raise, we'll adjourn until Monday at 10 a.m. You're on mute, Mr Newton. I'm assuming there's nothing.
Sorry, Your Honour. No, I have nothing to raise.
Thanks very much. Thank you. We'll adjourn.
Silence, please all stand. Coroners